And welcome back to another episode of Sports Wrap with me, Agatha.
And me, Naveen.
And we're going to be talking to you about what's been happening in sports this week, the ups and the downs, the upsets, and the pleasant surprises. But stay tuned. But before that, we're going to be diving into the sports headlines this week. We have another Filipino boxer who won a world crown. We're talking about Pedro Taduran, who stopped Samuel Salva to bag the IBF minimum weight title. And of course, we have in football, the Azkals pick up their first win versus Guam in the 2022 FIFA World Cup qualifiers. And in volleyball, we have the Philippine women's volleyball team who are competing and training in the Grand Prix in Thailand in preparation for the SEA Games.
Actually, the 2019 SEA Games for the women's volleyball team will be pressured packed, and there are two reasons for that. First, in 2015, the team finished in 5th place, and 2 years later, in 2017, they finished in 4th place. So, naturally, the progression would say they should make it to at least 3rd place, which becomes more pressured packed because they are going to compete in front of the Filipino people since the SEA Games will be held here. Unfortunately, Jaja Santiago, one of the tallest volleyball players you will find in the world and one of the most talented volleyball products the Philippines has ever had, will not compete for the national team in the SEA Games because she was unable to get a release from her pro team in Japan. Nevertheless, though, we still have Eliza Valdez, Gia Morado,
A lot of good players.
Abby Maranio, and Jovelyn Gonzaga. The Philippine team is a good mix of young standouts and steady veterans, and I have a feeling they're going to do much better than they did last time. But of course, the competition is going to be severe.
Yeah, and of course, they have their home court advantage. The Filipino crowd is going to be there to cheer them on. Speaking of the international stage, we have Gilas Pilipinas, who sadly ended their journey from the World Cup.
Yeah.
And on a not so good note, what do you think about what happened to them?
Well, not only did the Philippine team fail to get past the group stage of the tournament, they also didn't win a single game, even in the classification matches, which means out of 32 teams in the FIBA World Cup, the Philippines finished last. Now we have to look into the reason why the Philippines failed to achieve success in the World Cup. And when you look at it, especially against their competition, the lack of preparation really came out. You can't have less than a month to prepare for a tournament as big as the World Cup. And I think that moving forward, however the route that the Philippines takes going on, they need to come up with a system where the players are constantly in training, getting used to the coach's system, so that they can compete against the Italys and the Serbias of the world.
Yes, and to add to that, we have Coach Yeng Guiao, who resigned as the coach of Gilas Pilipinas.
Right.
So, do you have any contenders you think who could fill in those shoes?
Well, Tim Cone and Tab Baldwin come to mind, but again, whoever takes the spot should have the liberty to get whoever players they want from the PBA without having to worry about problems with team owners and management, and again, have the long-term planning period so that when we are in the world stage, we are prepared.
Yeah, and that's something that Coach Yeng Guiao was able to do. And I do like what Coach Yeng Guiao was saying about how losing is necessary, especially in the learning process. Not just losing in general, but losing by big margins. He was talking about in the preparation of China, for example. They were playing in the Summer League against players from the US, and they were losing by big margins, but that shouldn't bother them. I mean, it's part of the process, and they eventually learned from it.
Well, wise men do say that failure is the best lessons, right? And when you lose by 50 or 60 points with the whole world watching you, there are a bunch of lessons you can learn there. Now, going back to Coach Yeng Guiao, the job he was given was a nearly impossible task. He took over at a time of turmoil, following the suspensions in the fight against the Australian team, and he was able to bring both the SMC and MVP side together to put together a squad that could really represent the Philippines well. Unfortunately, injuries and the schedule conflicts between the PBA and the national team got in the way, and whoever the next head coach is, for the sake of Philippine basketball, I hope that there won't be so many roadblocks along the way, and the only thing the team needs to focus on is basketball.
Yeah, for sure. And talking about, investing in the preparation, you were mentioning about how they have other programs under Gilas also,
Correct.
preparing. You were talking about Juan Gomez Aliano, Richie Rivero,
Yeah.
all players in UP.
Of course.
Being part of that other group under Gilas.
Well, you know what? Speaking of Gilas, they have nowhere to go but up, right?
Yes. And that brings us to UAAP.
Correct.
Okay, we have a lot of upsets too this week. For both our teams, upsets but pleasant surprises. The UAAP is not anything but boring. It's not predictable.
Right.
Although we have to make a review of our predictions that we said. We talked about how UST is a dark horse.
And we might have undersold them even.
That's true. That's true. Considering their games, what can you say about UST's performance right now?
Well, first I have to say about the UAP, it's so unpredictable that you could go out for potato corner and come back and the game is totally different.
Yes.
But speaking of the Growling Tigers, I thought they would be a Final Four contender and it looks like they might even be a championship contender. Coach Alden Ayo, in fairness to him, has developed a system for UST that will have them competing for a championship this season. They have steady veterans and the young guys. Renza Bando is a superstar in the making. Mark Nonoy is extremely fun to watch. Chabio, best name in the UAP, and went toe-to-toe with Ange Kwame and outplayed him, if we're
Yeah.
being honest. And the Growling Tigers as a team, they're deep, they're talented, they're loaded. The question is, when they get to the Final Four, can their lack of experience be something that they overcome? Or is it an aspect that other teams will take advantage of?
And another thing to take into consideration, I was talking to you about this earlier, about how it's important for teams to take into consideration the timing of it all.
Right.
So we're talking about how early they peak and how it's important for them to peak at the right time, right? And this is something I remember happened to Adamson in the last season.
I'm sure you do.
Yes, because of course, one thing that UP likes to attribute to their performance in the latter part of the season is that they peaked at the right time.
Right.
While if you compare to Adamson, you would say they peaked kind of early. And personally, I wouldn't want that to happen to UST. I find myself rooting for them actually because of how impressive they started this season already.
Yeah.
But that's something to take into consideration as well.
You know, it's interesting you say that because I find similarities from UP's team last year to UST this year. In a way, they're like lovable underdogs.
Yes. Yeah.
Players who might not have as much hype as the Ateneos and La Salles of the world, and now even
Now
UP,
the UP.
right? Exactly. But these guys just go out and play.
And they have guys from the province that are playing so well, and that sounds familiar.
Exactly. Like at a time where UAP teams are trying to find an advantage by bringing in foreign recruits, UST, led by Coach Aldenayo, is finding like products in the country itself and developing them into high caliber college players.
Exactly. And let's talk about the bromance between Coach Alden Ayo and Coach Tab Baldwin. I love that.
I just have to say, that wasn't the case when Coach Alden was wearing green though.
Oh, that's true.
That's true.
And that's something you would notice.
Yeah, that's something I would notice. But speaking of Coach Tab, Ateneo is still the standard of college basketball. They have won 3 games and they have defeated both La Salle, although I have no memory about that game ever taking place. And they also defeated UST in a classic that should not have been at 10:30 in the morning.
I know.
Ateneo is still the best team in the UAP. When it comes down to getting the job done, especially in the fourth quarter, we saw against the Growling Tigers that they knew how to really get stops and come up with the big plays to come away with the win. However, I will also say that this season, more than the past 2, I think they will be most challenged because the amount of talent there is in the whole UAP is the best it's ever been. Like you said, there are dunks every game.
Yeah,
right?
you mean, I remember hearing the commentators. They were just talking about how you used to count the dunks in the season, and now you count the dunks in per game. And that's so exciting.
Exactly, and the best dunk so far has been Jamie Malonzo, the new one-and-done product of the De La Salle Green Archers. Speaking of La Salle, when they brought in consultant Jermaine Bird, their main focus was to develop the skills of their student athletes because they felt that before this past season, they weren't really able to hone the talents of the recruits. And so far in 2 games, Coach Bird's work has been in full display. Aldrin Malesio has improved, Andre Caraco has improved, and the whole team of La Salle is stacked. The problem is, and we saw this against the Bulldogs, can they keep their composure when things get tight?
And now, speaking of the Bulldogs, they've had a lot of heartbreakers this week.
The heartbreak kids.
Yeah, and I just want to say, NU, how are you?
You know, every time I see the graphic of the sad Bulldog on the Rappler Twitter section, I just want to cry too because it's so sad to see a Bulldog, you know, in tears, diba?
But I also find myself rooting for them. They have a lot of passion, and it's really seen in the brothers, the Ildefonso brothers. They're playing really well. I think they have a lot to show, like, this season. I think, well, they went against teams that were could be in the Final Four.
Right.
So they're trying to tell us that, hey, you know, we might be able to replace one of these teams.
Yeah. The interesting part about those games against Adamson and La Salle was that they trailed early, but they weren't willing to give up. They kept fighting and fighting. The question before the season was who could help Dave Ildefonso, and I think we have the answer. There are 2 guys who are ready to take the next step. His brother Sean was fantastic against the Green Archers, and even John Lloyd Clemente, who might be silent but is very deadly.
Yeah. And you know, okay, we were talking about how it's clear for sure that Ateneo is still a favorite and they're the standard, right? But considering everything that we just said, we can't place anyone next in that hierarchy. And in fact, we can't even make a hierarchy. So the standings right now are don't really tell us a lot.
Yeah. They won't indicate what will happen at the end of the UAAP season. But I think that adds to the excitement of the league this year. I feel like every game, well, maybe except the Red Warriors, has been very interesting. The talent is there, the competition is there, and these student athletes know that they're under the bright lights and they've been ready to perform. And it's been a treat for all of us fans. I just really wish the referees would stop trying to steal the spotlight. Come on.
Yeah, I have to agree on that one. But you know, they want a piece of it.
Yeah, I mean, who wouldn't want to be on television, right?
And you know, the UAAP, thank you, UAAP, for keeping us on our toes and giving us so many things to talk about. But it doesn't stop there. We just started. I can't believe we just started, but stay tuned because we're still going to be talking about the UAAP and we'll see. Oh, and by the way, UP shorts. Some are still short because we said we would stay tuned if UP would still have short shorts. Some are still short, some are long. I guess it's their preferences.
I think they should start a petition once a year. They should wear the short shorts. You know, throwback.
I want some of that short shorts. And now we move on past our borders and go to the international sports world. In tennis, we have Rafael Nadal, who won his 19th Grand Slam in the US Open, as well as, and this is exciting, we have Bianca Andreescu, who defeated Serena Williams.
Considered the greatest tennis player of all time.
And she was born a year after Serena Williams won her first Grand Slam. It's crazy.
I have a feeling we are going to hear her name a lot in the tennis world over the next decade.
Yeah, that's exciting.
And also, the NFL is back. And so far, the New England Patriots and the Kansas City Chiefs look like they're on the way to another big-time AFC Championship battle.
And that's what we have for
And that's a wrap.
I'm gonna add that to the list of things that upset me this week. And that's what we have for our sports news this week. That was what we had for our ups and our downs, but we have a lot more to come, so stay tuned. And we'll be right here to tell you all about them. And that's a wrap.